we have with us David Sproule, a senior Arctic official of Canada, Meredith Rubin, the senior Arctic official of the US, and the chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, Dalee, Sambo, Dorough. I would ask the panelists to turn off their microphones when they don't speak, so we don't have the feedback effect. And without break, after this session, we will go straight into this kind of final summing up by the EU's Arctic ambassador, Michael Mann. I asked the panelists the same questions I asked in the previous panel. So what are these kind of new aspects? We know that everybody wants sustainable development and peaceful and well-governed Arctic. But what has changed in this last years? What are the new aspects, new challenges, new ways of dealing with our old challenges in the Arctic, both on the side of the states and from the indigenous organizations? Okay, Meredith, would you like to start set off with the panel?
Oh, we're happy to. Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation so far today. As all of you know, the U.S. several of our agencies have been putting out Arctic strategies over the past couple of years. So what I'd like to focus on today are some of those commonalities and some of the areas where we engage, through the State Department and in collaboration with the other agencies. Let me just start by noting that the United States envisions the Arctic region as one that is free of conflict, where nations act responsibly, and where economic and energy resources are developed in a sustainable, transparent manner that also respects the interests and cultures of Indigenous people. We've long recognized the vulnerabilities and risks that the Arctic faces because of its unique circumstances, including from changes in snow and ice cover. And as the pace of those changes presents new challenges and opportunities, we are enhancing our attention to the region and strengthening our partnerships. To provide just a few examples, we've reestablished a consulate in Greenland, signed several statements of cooperation with Arctic partners. We continue to support Arctic research through the Fulbright program, through the National Science Foundation, and we're also developing and executing a polar security icebreaking fleet acquisition program that supports our national interests in the Arctic region. We also actively engage in the Arctic Council through all of its working groups and subsidiary bodies. The Arctic Council provides a critical consensus-based forum for governance of the Arctic. And in addition to the cutting-edge work it has produced for more than 2 decades, it has promoted peaceful cooperation among the 8 Arctic states and the region's indigenous groups. Increased activity in the Arctic presents another set of challenges and opportunities for the region. The Arctic Council's PAIM, which is the Protection of the Arctic Marine Environment Working Group, recently published a report detailing the extent to which shipping activity in the Arctic has increased in just the last 6 years. It noted that the number of ships entering the Arctic grew by 25%, and that the distance sailed by ships in the Arctic increased by 75%. To ensure that the member states are fully prepared to mitigate impacts from increased activity in the Arctic, the United States is co-leading projects in the Arctic Council, including oil spill responses and search and rescue operations. We are also working to reduce the existence, exposure, and impact of contaminants in Arctic communities, including waste management on shore to prevent marine litter, plastics, and microplastics. These are just 2 examples of our leadership in and contributions to the Arctic Council. The United States continues to take a balanced approach to the Arctic that promotes economic growth and improves energy security while protecting the environment. We are doing this by promoting good governance and environmentally responsible development with an emphasis on consistency among Arctic states and also environmental sustainability. We prioritize local capacity building to create a set of clean energy champions within Arctic communities, and we promote U.S. innovation and technology solutions to complex problems in the region. Whether challenge or opportunity, the role of the Arctic states in providing leadership in addressing these new challenges and opportunities working in close cooperation with the Arctic Indigenous communities and Arctic communities remains essential. The Arctic Council will continue to play a central role in these efforts, and the United States will continue to prioritize the Arctic Council and to strengthen cooperation and partnerships with Indigenous communities and among the Arctic states. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David, do you want to attempt to intervene?
Okay, I'll proceed then. In September 2019, the Government of Canada released a new and Arctic Northern Policy Framework. This new Arctic policy was co-developed over 2 years and in close and inclusive collaboration with provinces, territories, and Indigenous communities, and is intended to guide Canada's activities in the Canadian and Circumpolar Arctic through to 2030. The Arctic policy calls for strong, self-reliant people and communities working together for a vibrant, prosperous, and sustainable Arctic region at home and abroad, while expressing Canada's enduring Arctic sovereignty. We developed this integrated domestic and international policy together in this innovative fashion with a focus on people, on inclusion, prosperity, health, security, and sovereignty. Over the 2-year co-development process, the Government of Canada completed a series of roundtable engagements across Northern Canada, soliciting perspectives and priorities for the framework. Roundtables were also held with youth, subject matter experts, industry, and other representatives to solicit views of all. The final result is a strategy with all stakeholders seeing their priorities reflected, and which make it all the more meaningful and enduring. In launching our Arctic Policy Review, a number of changes in the Arctic and new national priorities informed our process. Global interest in the Arctic has been growing, driven by concern over climate change, the impacts in the region, as well as the prospect of new economic opportunities arising as a consequence of declining sea ice and technological development. This has led to considerable activity among Arctic and non-Arctic states, both in terms of development of new and updated national Arctic strategies and concerted multilateral, bilateral, and multi-stakeholder engagement. All of us here know the overwhelming evidence that the climate in the Arctic is warming at a much faster rate than anywhere else on the planet and has presented another key driver. We also know that these changes will have important consequences on the Arctic's ecosystems, economy, and people, but also on the global climate. Geopolitics has also increasingly been on the agenda, and we believe the rules-based international order is essential for peace and cooperation. Canada is leveraging its position as a global Arctic leader to strengthen it, and only through broad international cooperation can we address the greatest challenges facing the region. Too often in the past, Northerners have not had the opportunity to participate fully in decisions directly affecting them. In creating a new Arctic policy, we brought greater inclusivity and innovation to bear, ensuring that the co-developed end results reflected the perspectives and priorities of our Northerners, and especially the Indigenous inhabitants of Canada's Arctic region.
COVID-19 has had a dramatic impact on the Circumpolar Arctic, either directly in the form of infection or throughout indirect impacts. As with the rest of Canada, communities across Canada's Arctic and North have variously suffered COVID infection and in some cases sorely tested limited local infrastructure.
The pandemic has underscored underlying vulnerabilities due to remoteness, uneven access to adequate healthcare and housing, and other infrastructure shortcomings. However, I am pleased to relay that the collaborative process used to co-develop our Arctic policy helped inform our government's pandemic response. Earlier this year, over $425 million in targeted COVID-related funding was announced to address the unique needs of the Canadian Arctic. This was directed towards areas aligned with Arctic policy, including increasing access to food, healthcare system preparedness and mitigation efforts, and social services needs, non-repayable support for northern businesses, and securing critical air service to ensure essential resupply and continue access to remote northern communities. And just last week, due to the rise in COVID cases in Nunavut, the federal government announced that it is providing $19.36 million in immediate funding to support the government of Nunavut, Inuit communities, and Inuit organizations in their response to the pandemic. And there are pandemic-related impacts common to us all, and which we believe will be usefully addressed through international cooperation. Much has been done through the work we have collectively undertaken through the Arctic Council Sustainable Development Working Group.
And Canada looks forward to further multilateral and bilateral efforts in response to pandemic-related impacts affecting Arctic communities. Before I conclude, I would like to highlight some key points. Canada's co-developed
Arctic and Northern policy framework enables us to respond to the changing domestic and international landscape in the Arctic. And this includes meeting the challenges presented by the COVID pandemic. While we are on the right path, we need to continue to push to be innovative, to be open to new ideas, and to continue to work closely with our Indigenous, territorial, and provincial partners. We also work to ensure that the rules-based international order is strengthened, that Canada's international Arctic engagement responds to emerging global challenges, and people living in the region are resilient. Our international engagement will support our domestic priorities, including enhancing health, environment, and economic opportunities for our Arctic and Northern communities. And this includes continuing to work with our multilateral partners in the Arctic Council and beyond, and exploring new opportunities to work together bilaterally on the pressing issues before us in this rapidly Arctic region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's move to Inuit Circumpolar Council and Dalee. And so have this last decade seen changes in Inuit priorities when it comes to the Arctic. And maybe you could already comment on how do you see engagement of Inuit in setting the state's priorities on the Arctic.
Thank you very much. And David, nice to see you again. Meredith as well. Thank you very much, Adam. Well, first of all, I think it's highly significant that though we see changes in government, whether it's Canada, the United States, Denmark, and elsewhere, I have to say that Inuit have remained consistent since our initial organizing in 1977. Indeed, Eben Hobson Sr., who's recognized as the founder of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, before the organizing meeting and in his effort to unseat our lone member of the U.S. House of Representatives, Don Young, who, by the way, is still there, Eben Hobson campaigned on a platform of the need for a coordinated and coherent Arctic policy. And since that time, again, over 40 years ago, the Inuit Circumpolar Council has focused upon the need for a coherent and coordinated Arctic policy. So I think it is significant that we see the changes and reorientation of Arctic policies on the part of governments and certainly the 8 Arctic states. But on behalf of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, I do believe it's extraordinary that we have maintained a consistent approach. In the 1970s, we set up the objective to prepare comprehensive elements and principles for an Arctic policy. And one of the key features, of course, was recognition of our rights as Indigenous peoples, as Arctic Indigenous peoples, but also to ensure stability in the Arctic. So we focused upon peace and security. And indeed, that message has been echoed at a number of our General Assemblies, including in 1983 and now again or more recently in 2018, and the desire to establish the Arctic region as a zone of peace. Of course, we have also focused upon environmental protection and this important relationship between conservation and development, or namely sustainable development. Of course, the Arctic policy of the ICC has focused upon a whole host of social issues, cultural issues, economic issues, as well as education and scientific issues. And I think it's quite extraordinary that we have been able to, on a consistent basis, lend our views and perspectives and knowledge in the context of the more recent challenges that have emerged. For example, our engagement as an international non-governmental organization that has unified the voice of Inuit in the context of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, as firsthand observers and monitors of what is happening in our homelands, our traditional coastal seas and lands, that it's quite significant that we've been able to offer our unique perspectives. I just want to quickly point out that we have further focused some of our objectives in the recent adoption in 2018 at the General Assembly, where I was elected, in the form of the Reykjavik Declaration, which has numerous different sections, one being international Indigenous human rights, the significant and important issue of food security, which has been highlighted especially in the context of climate change. We've also reformulated some of the priorities in relation to families and youth, also health and wellness. And I think this is quite significant, especially against the backdrop of the current pandemic. Indeed, we were supposed to hold a health and wellness summit in early September of this year. That has been postponed, and we're hoping that we're able to host the Health and Wellness Summit in September 2021. Of course, originally we were focusing upon mental wellness of our communities, our individuals across the Circumpolar region, but also suicide prevention. But now that the pandemic has challenged all of us across the globe, that will certainly be taken into consideration and discussed. And I think that on the basis of the actions of our leadership, but also our own Indigenous knowledge, that we have some important and useful best practices, or good practices, or wise practices, maybe more specifically, to offer the rest of the world community in terms of the pandemic. Of course, Indigenous knowledge has been a priority, sustainable wildlife management, environmental conservation, and again, sustainable development. We're also very keen on enhancing our own ability to engage in communications and capacity development. So I'll just conclude by saying that I believe that we have remained consistent in terms of the need for a coherent and coordinated Arctic policy. We have consistently underscored the important element of the environment, both the marine environment as well as the terrestrial environment, that we have important knowledge that we can share in terms of the challenges facing the whole of the Arctic, but indeed our own communities first and foremost. And we continue to strongly believe that we have to have a seat at the table, that we have to have meaningful engagement. Our voice needs to be heard in all of these discussions, the policy making, the decision making, and of course, how it impacts not only our present conditions, but our future conditions. So in terms of gaining respect for and recognition of our distinct human rights through direct participation in all of these dialogues, I believe that ultimately we'll be able to achieve the kind of sustainable development that those across the Arctic region, but across the globe, are keen to achieve as well. I look forward to our discussion about the new aspects or the new challenges facing the Arctic. So, Qianak, thank you.
Thank you so much. And I would like to maybe take up on this, on your comment about thinking what to do following COVID, and how that changes the way we may need to operate. And I'm just, I think the Arctic Council has a couple of years very timely put this One Health initiative as one of the, I would say, flagship initiatives in the Arctic Council, one of the more visible ones, especially from the Sustainable Development Working Group. Canada, in her Arctic policy, had very, very strong focus on e-health. So I'm just wondering, following COVID, what are your expectations about sort of, I don't know, new trajectories, where the states and private actors, Indigenous organizations, where should they put their kind of investment when it comes to areas such as, I don't know, e-services, e-health, changing something in maybe the pandemic identified some additional infrastructural gaps that need to be filled in. Do you have any comments? And, whoever first, David, your microphone is, yes.
If you want, I'll begin. You're quite right. I think what the pandemic has shown us is the very issues that we are trying to address in our ANPF, our policy framework, are those that are shown and maybe exacerbated and brought out more clearly because of the pandemic. I mean, our north, we face remoteness, long distances, transportation issues, infrastructure issues, the cost of providing services, of providing goods, of transportation are all enhanced in our north compared to our south. And the kinds of things that we're trying to do in our ANPF is to close that gap, provide the same kinds of opportunities in the north that we enjoy in the south of Canada. And by that, the pandemic has forced us to find new ways to do it, technological ways that assist, whether it be medical care, whether it be communications, whether it be closing the gap in terms of our transportation systems. So the truth is that some of the things that we are starting to develop and realize that we needed more of in terms of helping Northerners and improving life in the north are things that have really been more pronounced now that we see the real critical needs that we have in the north. And those have been brought out by the pandemic. And of course, technology will be an important aspect of it, and no more important will technology be in terms of addressing issues in our country as they will be in the north with its special challenges.
Thank you, Adam, for the question. And I want to first of all say that we characterize this in terms of new challenges, but for many of the Inuit communities across Inuit Nunat, from Chukotka, Alaska, Canada, as well as Greenland, that these are not new challenges. In fact, they're old challenges. The infrastructure deficit that has existed for many of our communities in the way of housing, potable water, healthcare facilities, all of these things have become very acute in the context of the pandemic. And your question is framed on the basis of e-health. And if we don't if we don't have the basic infrastructure in terms of responding to this particular pandemic and certainly future pandemics, because I think this is probably only one of many to come, that the reaction and response of our communities from past epidemics, many of those conditions remain the same. And there are, in fact, I think it's quite significant that our leadership and also elders in our communities remember the harrowing impacts of previous epidemics and have taken this pandemic very, very seriously and undertook immediate actions to the leadership in particular, immediate actions to safeguard their communities because of that, the memory of those past epidemics. But I think that before we even begin to think about e-health and other areas, that we also need to be comprehensive and address the infrastructure deficits that continue to exist for our communities. The overcrowding in terms of housing, the lack of potable water, even though we live in the so-called developed world, the lack of basic healthcare facilities, an entire host of actually, unfortunately, it's a lengthy list of infrastructure deficits. So I think that even before we begin talking about the opportunities for e-health, we need all of that infrastructure as well as the technology in order to respond to something like COVID-19. And again, hopefully nothing else is on the horizon, but we don't know, and in order to be prepared for whatever else might be on the horizon, we had better close that infrastructure gap that has been persistent my entire life. So we might need to kind of reorient the question in terms of this not being a new challenge, but for many of us, unfortunately, for a whole generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Meredith, do you want to also comment on the?
Yes, please. If I could just add a little bit, what I'd like to note, just to add to David and Dalee's remarks is, the challenges that they've described are not limited to just one region or one country. These challenges are being experienced in many different places across the Arctic. And I think the work that the Arctic Council has done since the beginning of the pandemic to help share information, to identify these shared challenges, to identify approaches to addressing them has been quite helpful. I know
Jim DeHart in his remarks earlier today used an example of how that Arctic Council connection has been helping local communities across the region share their experiences, share their knowledge, and share their approaches
to attempt to strengthen those communities and help build some resilience and address the immediate challenges. I think more of that needs to happen. We're in a good, we've started strong and we have some good results, but we can really build on these networks to continue to enhance that knowledge and find solutions that can work for these communities that are maybe separated geographically but close culturally. And close in their approaches to how they manage things.
Thank you. And just wanted to remind the audience that you can place your questions in the question and answer panel in the Cisco WebEx window. I wanted also to ask, because it's actually interesting that in this panel we didn't really have security and geopolitics being mentioned that strongly, while in the previous two panels both we heard it from Denmark, we heard it from Russia, that this kind of geopolitical environment of the Arctic has changed in the last couple of years. I wanted to ask about your assessment. How do you see it changing? We do say that it's changing, that things are speeding up, so I wanted to ask your assessment. How is it changing, and how it is influencing the priorities of Canada, US, and the ICC? And how do you see your work in the Arctic changing because of the changing environment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You want to start? Because
I'm happy to respond and comment. I was anticipating this when you spoke about at the outset in the introduction of this panel about new aspects and new challenges, and I think that the Arctic region overall as a central feature of geopolitics today is a new aspect. I think that certainly for the Inuit Circumpolar Council, we arose in the context of the Cold War, so we were intimately familiar with the tensions between the United States and the Russian Federation. Indeed, when we first invited our relations, the Siberian Yupik, to join the 1977 conference, and they were disallowed to join by then Soviet Union, it's fortunate that we now have their engagement, we have their involvement. We have one of our executive council members who joins whenever possible our delegation to the Arctic Council. So that's significant. But the fact that the Arctic has now become a central feature of high politics is something new and different in terms of the place of the Arctic in geopolitics, with the concerns being expressed by commentators and scholars about the activities of the Russian Federation, the interests of China and other non-Arctic states, and the growing list of observers to the Arctic Council really does underscore the place of the Arctic in geopolitics overall, and not simply the Northern Hemisphere. So for Inuit and the Inuit Circumpolar Council, of course, we hope to see continued stability within the region. And the reference that I made to peace and security and the resolutions that we adopted in 1977, 1983, again in the Reykjavik Declaration in 2018, seeking to lay a foundation for diplomatic talks to ensure that the Arctic is a zone of peace. This is a matter that we hope is taken very seriously by the Arctic 8 states, and significantly by the Arctic 5 littoral states as well. And I suppose it remains to be seen what will happen with the transition to the Biden administration in the United States, and the reaction and response of other Arctic Council member states to such an objective. But I just thought it would be important to offer those comments, that we're acutely aware, just because of our history and the reality of the Cold War, that this is an important discussion to maintain and continue. And fortunately, the Arctic Council has moved forward since 1996 on the basis of peace and stability, cooperation, and as Meredith has just said, in relation to the pandemic, a collective effort to be responsive. So our hope is that continues. Thank you.
Well, I'll go next. Yes, indeed. I think that we have seen in recent years, because of accessibility of our north, with climate change and melting of the ice cap, there has been increased interest, and there's also been increased activities by some of our northern neighbors in terms of re-equipping, increasing their military capabilities. And for that, of course, Canada will continue to rely heavily on its partnerships with the United States in terms of our security interests in the Arctic are concerned.
Also as a member of NATO. So all those concerns are actually enhanced with developments and the increased accessibility of the North and the Arctic, and are uppermost in Canada's mind.
At the same time, there's other aspects of security which we're very conscious of, the less traditional ones, the soft security. And in this regard, we have had to enhance our capabilities in terms of search and rescue. Things like responsiveness to environmental disasters. And those are all areas that our security is at stake in addition. And in that regard, I would have to give a little shout out to the Arctic Council. You will see in terms of the kinds of working groups that it's developed over the years, those are developed with a very, very direct response to hard realities, security realities actually, such as pollution, disasters, and safety of people. And they all come about again because of the increased accessibility. So as far as security writ large is concerned, indeed, it has enhanced our security awareness. It will enhance our security preparedness, and security will figure very largely, and does figure very largely, in our new Arctic and Northern policy framework.
Thank you. Yes, Meredith, please. I see that you turn on the microphone.
Thank you. With respect to the geopolitics, it's clear there's been a lot more attention paid to the Arctic in the last couple of years, and both in terms of those of us, Arctic states and non-Arctic states. I think particularly after the Arctic Council ministerial in Rovaniemi, there was a lot of attention paid to the fact that there was no ministerial declaration at the ministerial, but I think there was less attention provided to the fact that there was a joint statement signed by all 8 foreign ministers. And that joint statement reaffirmed the commitment of the eight Arctic states to maintaining the Arctic as a region of peaceful cooperation. And I don't think that statement should be underestimated. I consider that to be a very strong message and a strong signal that of the commitment among the 8 to maintaining it a peaceful region. So yes, there's a lot of activity, there's increased activity, there's increased attention, but kind of that overarching umbrella of peaceful cooperation was reiterated at the highest levels very recently, and probably deserves more attention than it has received thus far.
And maybe the final 2 questions for this panel. One very specific coming from the audience regarding the underwater cultural heritage and how this kind of opening towards the underwater cultural heritage could be included in Arctic states' priorities in the Arctic. And from me, the question, and feel free to address both or either of these in your kind of final words. And from me, the question, to follow up what the 3 of you just said about the Arctic Council. So what are your kind of expectations in the, let's say, next 5-10 years? What would be the new avenues for the Arctic Council cooperation, the new kind of space for projects, the new ideas that you expect to emerge in the Arctic Council as new spheres for cooperation, this kind of circumpolar cooperation? Yes. Would you like to start?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start. There's been a lot of talk recently and during these panels about COVID and the impact of pandemics in Arctic communities. And so I would certainly see the Arctic Council taking a more active role there. We've already laid the groundwork, starting with this report that was released over the summer. And there's a strong desire to enhance the work that's being done so far. So I think we'll see a bit more on that. And then certainly, Russia has previewed its chairmanship program for the Arctic Council, and we expect a strong focus on sustainable development. I think we've heard from across the Arctic there's a desire to ensure that there is sustainable development, that it's transparent, that it's responsive to local communities' needs while respecting the environment, and the Council is very well placed to do that. So I think those are two areas that you'll certainly see continued development in the coming few years.
Thank you. We turn off the microphone, so I assume you wanted to.
Yes, would you like me to speak? With regard, I'll just address your second question. Maybe Dalee would like to talk about preservation of our underwater heritage. And if she doesn't, I'll give it a shot. But first, I think I'd like to focus on your second question, if I would. Insofar as future directions of the Arctic Council are concerned, I think the new chairmanship, perhaps with a change of one of our partners' administrations, we will be able to address fully issues related to climate change. And that will be a priority for Canada, and I think it'll be a priority for all of our members going into the next chairmanship, and that's critically important. The pandemic, obviously, we have to think about new ways and particular challenges the Arctic and North face for this ongoing threat, which will probably come again. And I would like to just mention something that I've seen an evolution of since my first involvement on the Arctic Council, is a recognition of the importance of Indigenous knowledge as far as our work is concerned across the working groups, but also on the various subjects like environment, safety, climate change. Much has to be offered from an enhanced use and knowledge of Indigenous knowledge. And this is a recognition which has slowly evolved. And we're very grateful. And I think part of the reason is the unique configuration of our Arctic Council, which includes, of course, permanent participants who can bring that benefit to our work on the Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dalee, you were the first in the Arctic, so you have the word for today's panel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. I think that, first of all, it is really significant that David has spoken to the issue of security, and that it is not solely in the context of high politics or hard security, but the significance and importance of economic security, social security, cultural security, environmental security, as well as the big S security in terms of defense and the interests of the nation states. I think this is an important thing. And in response to your question of the Arctic Council in the coming 5 to 10 years, it would be quite interesting to see a discussion about actually, if you think about it, going back to the objectives of the Arctic Council and protection of the Arctic environment, that we can't separate out these the big S security questions in terms of environmental protection. If you think about the deleterious impacts that this kind of security discussion can have on the environment, but it would be helpful. It would be useful for in the next 5 to 10 years, some serious discussion about the Arctic as as a zone of peace and shared objectives to really lend the region's contribution to the world community by addressing the region in the context of a zone of peace. I think that the new spheres for cooperation actually hint at what David just said about the significance
and the importance of Indigenous knowledge. And I think that I would amplify that a bit further by stating that this would then require a much more substantial
engagement of Arctic Indigenous peoples and possibly beyond their role presently as permanent participants. There's been, of course, a lot of discussion about reform of the Arctic Council to make it more effective. And of course, from the point of view of the Inuit Circumpolar Council and other Arctic Indigenous peoples, that defining an increased role for them to effectively influence overall the agenda and the approaches based upon what they have to offer, including Indigenous knowledge, that this would be something I think quite significant. So really finding concrete ways to enhance the genuine and meaningful engagement of Arctic Indigenous peoples in the work of the Arctic Council. You know, there has been discussion in all of the working groups, and especially those that we are most active in, CAF, PAIM, SDWG, as well as AMAP, for meaningful engagement. But, you know, if you evaluate and assess progress so far, where do we actually see the concrete examples of the PPs, or Arctic Indigenous peoples generally, heavily influencing the outcomes and the serious
engagement of Indigenous knowledge in the actual work, especially out there and on the ground where the impacts within our communities are actually seen and
felt. So I think this is an area that is ripe for a new and different sphere of cooperation. So I want to just quickly say something about the first question about cultural heritage. And as everyone knows, the discussion that is taking place in relation to the gap in UNCLOS about the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, and of course, the cultural heritage, again, the Indigenous knowledge of Indigenous peoples in this discussion is crucial. I think that we have to recognize that everything is interrelated, the Arctic Ocean and the coastal seas, and that, you know, in terms of the biodiversity and our Indigenous knowledge, not to mention our cultural heritage, both tangible and intangible, in terms of use of the coastal seas and the Arctic Ocean, that we have to play a role not only in these discussions, but again, the knowledge that we can bring forward in the context of biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, or biodiversity overall, cannot be discounted, and in fact should be elevated to the greatest extent possible, and certainly by us as Inuit, as Arctic Indigenous peoples, and the ability to raise our voice within not only this dialogue, but a whole host of intergovernmental organization dialogues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and let's give a big virtual hand to all the panelists. And we will move now. Thank you so much for your discussion. And we'll move now to summing up of this free panel session. And this, we are honored to have the US Arctic Ambassador, Michael Mann, to do that. And apart from discussing the kind of this process link, maybe following up what the Commissioner said in the beginning of this day, the process leading to the new EU document, Also, we've asked Ambassador to maybe mention some takeaways from these 3 panels that he thinks can be useful for EU officials as they work on their new Arctic policy. And I think this will pave the way to the session dedicated specifically to the EU's Arctic engagement and the European Green Deal, which will take place on the 2nd of December, 3:15 Brussels time, and will be moderated by the predecessor, one of the predecessors of Michael Mann, Madame Marianne Konings. Okay, Michael, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much, Adam. I guess, shall I start with a little bit about the EU's Arctic policy and where we are, and then perhaps I can come back with some takeaways afterwards. Does that work for you?
Brilliant.
Yeah, is that okay for you, the way I suggest?
Yes, excellent.
Very good. Okay, thanks very much. Well, as you all know from what's been said before, the EU's current Arctic policy is set out in a document that was published 4.5 years ago, which is already a long time ago, not least when we talk about climate change, which has accelerated alarmingly in the last 4 years. Obviously, also, the level of geopolitical interest in the Arctic region has also increased exponentially, as the panelists today have pointed out. We want to offer European solutions for a changing Arctic, we being the European External Action Service, where I work, and the European Commission, DG Mare, is in the co-lead with us on this issue. We're glad to say that an updated EU Arctic policy is now firmly anchored in the 2021 Commission work programme, and we hope that this will be ready for adoption in the last quarter of 2021. We're very grateful to the many distinguished participants in this conference and other people who contributed to our recent public consultation on the EU's Arctic policy. The consultation closed on November the 10th, and we're now close to finishing the task of analysing the invaluable contributions from about 140 submissions from all over the world, from governments, business lobbies, think tanks, universities, NGOs, Indigenous groups and private citizens too. And while, as the Commission said, it's too early to draw final conclusions, it is fair to say that the majority of those who took part believe that the 3 priorities of our current Arctic policy are just as valid today as they were in 2016. And if anything, they've become more urgent. As the Commissioner said, these priorities are environmental protection and the fight against climate change, sustainable development, and the need to maximise international cooperation.
Our primary aim in the EU is that the Arctic region should remain areas of low tension and of peaceful cooperation, that our actions must be underpinned by cutting-edge science and research, that we must take full account of the interests, opinions, and knowledge of Arctic residents, and in particular the Indigenous populations. However, having said that, our existing policy framework does need to be developed further and taken to the next level. As I said before,
things in the Arctic have changed rapidly over the last 4 years, and there are a number of issues which are either not addressed at all in our current policy or they're only touched upon. A few examples, the green transition, hydrogen, health, agriculture, tourism, demography, the circular economy, search and rescue, young people, and gender equality, to name just a few. Our updated policy document must tie in as closely as possible to the priorities of the von der Leyen Commission, the Green Deal, and the EU's growing geopolitical role in the world. And of course, we must be sensitive to the changes brought by the COVID pandemic. We will also have to strike a delicate balance between precautionary measures and the protection of fragile Arctic ecosystems on the one hand, and the urge to use and develop Arctic resources on the other. It will be very important to find ways to ensure that the benefits of economic development remain in Arctic communities where people have legitimate socio-economic aspirations and want to establish the conditions for a viable future for their children and their children's children. And as a legislator in the European Arctic, the EU can offer European solutions and provide examples of high technical standards and standards for governance that ensure sustainable development that puts people first and respects their livelihoods both today and tomorrow. We also need to have an inclusive approach. We've heard a lot today about embracing the views of young people who are the future of the Arctic, and also gender balance. And I like to dream that through enhanced European engagement, we can help to stimulate and inspire a robust but green transition where the Arctic regions can showcase future compatible job creation in sectors as diverse as the extractive industries, carbon neutral energy, e-based learning, tourism, green technologies, fisheries, animal husbandry, and many others beside. So that's basically where we are. Would you like me now to go on to my takeaways from today, or how do you want to play it?
Yes, please. And I can only still mention to the members of the audience that you can also pose your questions to Ambassador in the Q&A section.
Well, thanks very much, Adam. It's been so diverse and so rich today that I've done my very best to try and boil it down to a few key issues. But first of all, of course, I'd like to thank the International Polar Foundation and its partners, and especially Joseph Cheek for all his work in organising this impressive event today. Despite COVID, it's been extremely well organised. The decision to move it online, I think, was a good one. And there's been a very vibrant interaction between the panelists, and that's been helped by excellent moderation, really. It's been a very useful learning exercise for everyone, and especially for me. I'd like to thank Commissioner Sinkevicius for his excellent contribution. Foreign Minister Soled's participation and remarks were also very important. And of course, our friends from Canada, the US, the Kingdom of Denmark, Iceland, Finland, Canada, and the US, as well as the Sami Council and the International Circumpolar Council, have all provided plenty of perspectives and food for thought. Thanks also to Nikolai Kochanov for his participation, which is, I believe, is the first time in many years that the Russian Arctic ambassador has taken part in the Arctic Future Symposium. That's very welcome. And now I come to the many takeaways that I've taken from today's discussions. The first one, I think, is a broad recognition of the need to ensure proper stakeholder engagement. Inclusive policy needs an inclusive process. We in the European Union held a wide-ranging consultation, and we did that on purpose. It was a real, genuine effort to get input. It wasn't just paying lip service to public consultation. We welcome continuous feedback from the Arctic community, and our doors and our telephone lines are always open if people have a contribution to make. At the same time, we have to keep in mind that it's not all Arctic peoples and Arctic communities have the same access to webinars. So we're very pleased to have received input for our public consultation from a very diverse set of people. I mentioned earlier, including citizens who have raised our awareness about this difference in living conditions and the need for social inclusion. We have heard from those countries who have recently published strategies that internal and external policies need to play well together. And as such, the EU Green Deal will be a cornerstone in this regard in our new joint communication in 2021. Stakeholder engagement needs to take the different Arctic contexts into account. There is not one Arctic, but very, very different regions. I must say, I also agree very much with the point that Thomas made about being a little bit wary of the hype that's going on around hard security. I think it matters how we talk about this. I'm in public events that I do constantly being asked about hard security. But from our perspective, it's obvious that there is a very clear and present danger already representing a threat to Arctic livelihoods, and that is climate change. And that is why climate change will, of course, remain a key element in everything that we do in the Arctic. It's crucial that we invest in people, especially young people, and also take account of the gender aspect, like I mentioned before. I also took note of what Tonya said earlier. I like that quote. The Arctic is our home. We have vibrant, thriving societies. It's not an empty space. I also liked when Petteri talked about the importance of concrete action, focusing on results. And I think we, in our paper, would like to focus on concrete results rather than on philosophizing too much. Again, the business aspects are very vital. They came out in today's discussions, making sure that the benefits of economic development stay in the Arctic and meet the socio-economic aspirations of the people who live there to generate a future for the young people in the Arctic. And hopefully we can direct some of our EU funds to that end. I also hope that we can inspire innovation in the Arctic to help develop green technologies that aren't just helpful in the fight against climate change in the Arctic, but can hopefully be used everywhere. Hopefully the European Union is now putting a huge amount of its budget towards green technologies and the fight against climate change. Hopefully we can inspire people to develop these technologies and show that fighting climate change is actually a job creator, and hopefully allow people to export these technologies elsewhere so we can be the world leaders there and also be generally helpful. The EU can be a standard setter. I'm thinking perhaps of filters on polluting factories or building standards, maybe also in terms of corporate governance. And I think another point I want to make, obviously health is going to be much more important in the future. COVID has made people very conscious of health threats from the pandemic, but as a number of speakers pointed out, we also face potential future issues with the thawing of permafrost releasing bacteria and viruses that are maybe lain dormant for a very, very long time. Finally, as my background is in the world of communications, I agree entirely that we need to do more to make people understand what the Arctic is and what it's all about, and that it's not just an issue for those living above the Arctic Circle, but of course what happens there is vital for everyone. I think that's how I'd like to sum up. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And maybe just one kind of not obvious question. What we discussed a couple of times, and there was a question about it, that EU, maybe also other actors from outside the Arctic, could be standard setters or could, try to share their best practices, best experience. What is your feeling? What are we identify areas where Europeans could learn something from the Arctic for European governance, for kind of changes to European economy, European society, and not only about EU's Arctic policy, but in more general terms?
Well, I touched on that a little bit earlier. I mean, I think it's very important to remember that, again, it's this point that the Arctic isn't just an empty space. There is a vibrant economy going on there, and there are technologies being developed there that have a more global use. I was the ambassador in Iceland before I came here, and I saw fantastic examples of how Iceland had become a kind of mini hub for the blue economy and for green technologies. And the great thing about that was that a lot of the Icelandics are very good at utilizing European programs. So there was a lot of money from the Horizon program going into some very innovative green energy and blue economy projects in Iceland. So I think there are technologies that can be specifically developed in the Arctic, which are specifically designed to mitigate the situation in the Arctic, but they should have a more general utilization outside of the Arctic. And I hope, as I said, that some of these European funds can actually be directed in that direction to try and assist that. The other thing that I think is interesting is that sitting in Brussels, I regularly have very bad Wi-Fi connections. And I've heard that while there are parts of the Arctic where the Wi-Fi is still lacking, there are actually parts of, for example, my Norwegian friends tell me that the quality of connectivity up in the north of Norway is second to none. So I think we can actually learn things that, if it's possible to do it in such a vast region, it's also possible to do it on a more local level as well. And I just think people have not really tapped into the amount of really future-orientated projects that are going on there. And so it's a sort of two-way street. One is us, hopefully, the European Union being a legislator, not just for the European Union countries that are in the Arctic, but also for Norway and Iceland as well, thanks to the European Economic Area Agreement. We actually have a legislative influence in 5 of the Arctic countries. So that can work positively that way. But by the same token, I think hopefully we can take lessons from what entrepreneurs and business people are doing in the Arctic. There are so many fantastic circular economy projects going on up there that I think is an example to everybody.
Thank you very much. I know a couple of Northern European Arctic regions who would very much come together with you on this conclusion. I wanted to thank you so much for the summing up words. This was excellent. I again invite everybody for the following days of the Arctic Futures, and perhaps especially after Michael's intervention, to the sessions dedicated specifically to EU's Arctic engagement and the European Green Deal starting and 3:15 on the 2nd of December. And I wanted to again thank all the panelists. It was a challenging panel, and because we had so many participants in this session. And I wanted to join Michael in thanking the team from the International Polar Foundation, and especially Joseph Chick for making this conference today possible.